So let's talk about getting and installing an SSL. Where do you get an SSL? There's a lot of different places. There's more all the time. You can do a Google search on SSL certificates, and you'll come up with a lot of hits on them. Important thing is maybe check with your host. Maybe there's ones that they work with specifically. Many hosts actually resell certificates at a very reasonable rate, and that way you know your host is familiar with it. You don't want one that's too proprietary, because if you do move to a different host, you certainly don't want trouble transferring it, so you want to stick with some of the better names. Quite often a host will resell a good quality certificate, and they're very familiar with it, so it makes it pretty easy. Another one is ask other online merchants, people in your peer group or people that you know have e-commerce sites, who they use, how much they paid to do it, and how it went for them as far as transferring it over. That's an important question, is how much do they cost? They used to be really expensive. To pay $400 to $700 for an SSL was not uncommon, but that's changed dramatically with so many different vendors entering the marketplace. Now, it's between $49 and several $100, but around $49 to $89 is a very common price to pay for one. So you may say, well, what about shared SSL? A lot of hosts offer a shared SSL. That's probably not the best idea. Reason being, and the reason I ask, how many sales can you afford to lose? Remember when we talked about the little gold lock that people could click on? If they click on this little gold lock with a shared SSL, the information comes up, and the information is about your host and not you. This can shake consumer confidence. If they think, well, wait a minute, that doesn't match up with who I think I'm shopping from, they may bail on the sale. So, how many sales can you afford to lose? So the important thing is, get your own SSL. It's the right thing to do. It's a cheap decision. How many sales can you afford to lose to try to save $80? It just doesn't make sense to use a shared SSL. And it also introduces some technical problems, some mapping problems that you may not want to have to deal with. So get your own SSL. How do you install it? It's a fairly simple process, but there are some gotchas that we'll look out for as we go. First of all, do some homework. Talk to your host. What do they expect? How does the process go with them? It varies. The process is basically the same, but different hosts like to do it different ways. So talk to your host right up front and ask them, how and what do I need to do to install an SSL? Going back to, again, sometimes the host resell one. This may be a real advantage to ease the process. But either way, just talk to them and see how it's done. Then talk to your SSL vendor. It's important that you know what the SSL vendor plans on providing you and how they do it, and knowing what your host expects and how to get that to them. This is what I mean by doing your homework. Just making sure you do all this ahead of time. Now, the important thing is, and stop and take a breath here, make sure your records match. When you go to purchase an SSL certificate, basically that certificate is saying you are who you say you are. And if the information you provide to your SSL vendor is different from your company information or different from the information of who owns the website, you could run into problems here. It'll throw up a red flag, and they'll have to check things out, and you'll have to submit information about your company. It can really gum up the works. So have all this in line ahead of time, and when you talk to your SSL vendor or read over their FAQ information, make sure you really pay attention to this, that all your records are in order, and the process goes really smooth. It seems like once you hit a bump in the road, though, the road stays bumpy, so just make sure you do your homework here. Then you get and transfer your SSL key. The vendor will provide a key to you. A key basically is a text document with the encryption code, and you won't be able to read it if you open it, but it's what your host expects to get. They'll provide this to you. Do not modify the key. Transfer it to your host exactly as you get it. Resist the temptation to open it. If you open it in Word, it'll put liner apps in there that aren't supposed to be there, and if the key doesn't match up properly because of something that you've inadvertently edited, it won't work, and you'll have to reissue the key. So make sure the key doesn't get modified at all. Transfer it directly to your host, as is. Install the SSL in your root directory. What I mean by that is the host will say, do you want to install it in a directory on your site or on your whole site? Have it installed on the root of your site so your entire site is protected by SSL. The reason is, have you ever been on a website where when you click on a link, a little shield comes up and says some elements of this site may not be under the SSL or protected? That's because the site developer doesn't have the entire site under SSL, and it's pulling images or whatever from an unprotected source. And the certificate or the SSL company or vendors throw this up as a red flag, saying maybe there's something being pulled in here that shouldn't be. If you have your entire site protected, your SSL is installed into the root directory, you won't run into this problem. Best thing to do is just install it under the root directory. Then test your site. Easiest way to do this is you can have any page on your site and go to the site using HTTP at the beginning of your URL. If you change that over to HTTPS, it will invoke the security certificate and the little gold lock will appear. If it doesn't, there's something wrong. Let's take a look at that. Here we've jumped to a demo store on the Cartweaver site, a shopping cart application we'll be looking at later. And if we look at it, right now in the corner, there's no gold key. We're just looking at the product. Now, if we were to click through and go to the checkout right now, the gold lock would appear. But let's force that situation. We go up here, see where it says HTTP? If we change this to HTTPS and hit enter, now we see down here in the corner that the gold lock has appeared. That shows that the entire site is under SSL, and the merchant, or in this case the developer, can invoke that SSL at any time by using HTTPS. That's the advantage of having the entire site under your SSL certificate, as you can invoke the certificate at any time by using HTTPS. The nice thing about this is there is some performance hit, not much, very little, but there is some performance hit with encryption. So you don't have to invoke the security certificate until you actually need it, but it's there when you need it, and all the problems with mapping and everything I talked about, if it was under a certain directory, go away. Your entire site is protected. We can see here that when the little gold lock appears, you click on it. Does it read right? If it does, then you know your certificate's installed correctly, and you're ready to go. You're ready to start accepting credit card transactions knowing that your site is protected under SSL and that it's working properly. You'll know that, you'll feel better about that, your customers will know that, and that's the most important thing. So in the next chapter, we'll talk about accepting payments online, another important element of putting together a shopping cart application online. True, a lot of this has nothing to do with programming or actually working in Dreamweaver, but it's important that you know this because your clients will be looking to you to be the expert on this, to know this. So it's good that we discuss this and you have it firmly in mind. So next, we'll talk about accepting payments online.